to another episode of Power and Purpose. I'm Amanda Sloat.
And I'm Nathalie Tocci.
Today we are joined by Dina Kawar, who has served as Jordan's ambassador to the United States since 2016. Her previous diplomatic posts include ambassador to France and the United Nations, where she was the first Arab woman to preside over a Security Council meeting. Today we'll be discussing Middle East politics, multilateral affairs, and her impressive diplomatic career. Dina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's jump right into the foreign policy topic of the day, which is the war in Iran. At the time we're recording, it remains unclear how things will play out as negotiations are stalled, the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed, and numerous countries are feeling the energy crunch. I'm curious how this conflict looks from Amman and what you're envisioning moving forward in the next couple of weeks.
Well, we're watching the negotiations very closely and hoping that there will be a peaceful resolution of this conflict. As you know, this war has affected us directly. The economic situation and the implications, other than the security, of course, but the economic implications have been disastrous on Jordan. To start with, our economic growth depends a lot on the tourism sector, and the tourism sector is now at zero. People are scared. There's nothing to be scared of. If you were to be in Jordan right now, you'll be okay. But people are scared, and the tourism sector is 14% of our economic sector, our GDP. And right now, because the government is doing its utmost to keep the sector going and keep the employment going, it will cost us around 600 million at the end of the year, which is a lot of money for our economy. Not to mention that it affects the growth, the prices, inflation. We're importers of oil and gas, so you can imagine the increase in oil, how much it will affect our growth. We've been struggling since many years now, and since the Arab Spring, with putting back growth into our economy and injecting. To do that, you have to inject money. And at the same time, we want to upkeep our debt payments and our level on the international market and our seriousness. So trying to juggle both growth and is a difficult task. But when there's a war in the region, definitely it will affect us immediately. And right now, thankfully, the US is very supportive economically of Jordan, but we need to get to a point where the growth in our economy picks up on its own. And of course, the security aspect is a problem. Now, on the Hormuz, obviously, when we started this war, Hormuz was never mentioned. And now it's become the major obstacle in this war that will affect the whole economy. We have to remember that the economy of the Gulf states is important for the world's economy because they invest everywhere. They have large part of international investments, and they are putting their money in AI and the companies in the US. And obviously they employ a lot of non-Gulf people, including a lot of incredible Jordanians who work in the Gulf states. So we hope that this will end up soon because the implications are beyond.
Dina, if you turn from your east to your west, things are not a lot better. If we think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, of course, there was the hope that with the Trump plan, beyond a ceasefire, there would be the reopening of prospects for a Palestinian statehood. That doesn't exactly seem to be in the making. In fact, not only is the ceasefire in Gaza sort of violated every other day by Israel, not only is more than half of Gaza still occupied, but of course, closer to home for you, there is growing threats of annexation of the West Bank. So I'm just wondering if you could talk us through how you see developments in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Of course, for Jordan, the issue of the West Bank, of Israel, of Gaza is much closer to home, and it impacts us a lot because, first of all, it's a neighboring country, and second of all, as you know, we have a large number of Palestinian refugees in Jordan since years and years, not to mention that some of the Jordanian population sector is originally a Palestinian. So there's always an identification with this conflict that people do not understand. A lot of times I have to explain to many people here how this is felt at home. And it's not just we're looking at it the same way you would look at a conflict. It is home. And so this is very important. And what is going on in Israel
Could I ask you just to break that down a little bit? What do you explain to people in Washington, and what would you like our listeners to understand about how this really feels for people in Jordan?
Well, I mean, if you look at the Jordanian population, right now we're talking about 11 million, a bit more. We have around 30% refugees, out of which maybe 1.3, if not more, Syrian refugees that came with the war. But if you put aside the Syrian refugees, which is another issue we can discuss a bit later if you want, half of the population, almost 2.5 million, are Palestinian, what they are identified as Palestinian refugees, meaning they have Jordanian passports, but they don't have the national number, which means they are not citizens who can vote, but have every other right to work, to live. It's a document. And then you have the Palestinians who are Jordanian, fully Jordanian, but of Palestinian origin. So there is intermarriage between Palestinians and Jordanians. So any home in Jordan is Palestinian and is Jordanian at the same time. So the feeling for this injustice is very much rooted in our DNA. It's not something we pretend. It's not something we learn about and say, well, we learned this is right, this is wrong. No, people feel it. And so when the Gaza war happened, it hit every Jordanian deeply. I mean, it hit the whole world, as you can see, because seeing the mass destruction of Gaza was horrendous. And never in our century, in watching our Instagram and our Twitter accounts and social media, you see people in famine next to a country that, countries that are normal. Never in the 21st century you would hear that there is food standing and waiting to go in but cannot go in. This is not normal. We have normalized the abnormal in this war. It is not normal. And it's against international law to have prevented food from going in and aid and medical aid. It is not normal to have collective punishment in situations of war. And so what worries us in Jordan is that the policies of the extreme right government in Israel is going to be a disaster, another disaster for the region, because what this government is doing and their policies and the policies of the right wing within this government, it's causing so much tension with allowing settler violence in the West Bank going unhinged. Do you know that since the beginning of this year, around 16 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank? Nobody talks about them. You have to understand that they go into homes, they get people out of their homes, they kill them. It's like no man's land. And what I try to say to a lot of people in the West, when somebody from yours dies, we see his photo on TV. We know if he's married or not, if he had a love story, if he has a family, if he has, everything about him. You give him the credit. In our part of the world, it's numbers. I don't even see that numbers matter anymore. 16 died today, 13 died tomorrow. So this settler violence is a problem. But I also say to many people here, what you don't realize, it's not just bad for the Palestinians, it is bad for the Israelis. Half of the population of the historic land of Palestine is Arab, and the other half is Jewish. And now, how will that pair if there's no Palestinian state? What will happen? That's something that we need to think of. Is the Grand Israel going to be all democratic? And if so, are we really going to apply democratic standards to the Palestinians? Who knows? I doubt it. So my thing is, the Israelis have become scared, but they're scared. What they don't realize, they are scared of their own policies. What happened with Hamas was a problem because the Israeli government tried to put aside the Palestinian Authority for many, many years and undermine them after the Oslo talks. Rabin's death and killing was the start of a whole new wave in Israel, or at least the surfacing of very right-wing feelings in Israel. And right now, I say we need to save the West Bank and Gaza and have a Palestinian state. But if the Western governments don't realize that they need to save Israel from itself, then this will go on. And then one day we'll have another war somewhere else. When is it that a head of state or a prime minister of a government goes to the UN and shows the map of Grand Israel. Do you find that normal? I mean, would anybody else do that? So they have normalized the abnormal, and everybody has gotten used to it and does not say anything about it. But my fear is that this expansionist feeling and living upon the fear of the Israelis is a problem. And this year and last year, so many Israelis that contributed so much to the society in Israel, to the economy, have left. They're going back to Europe. They're going back to the US. They're losing the best of their own population that made the economy vibrant. So these things are things we want to look at. And look, we have a peace treaty with Israel. We have the longest border with Israel. We're making sure that this security de facto, we would do that to any border. The same is going with Egypt. They have the first peace plan with them. They've normalized relations with UAE, with Bahrain, with Morocco, with Sudan, and others are on the way. So this idea of saying
Can I just jump in there and perhaps just kind of circling back to Amanda's question earlier? I mean, what is the connection between these different wars?
I don't like to think that this war was started so that the oil routes would change and move into Israel. But I doubt that anybody would be as, conspiratorial as saying, let's start wars with Iran for that, because the major problem has been in this Iran war. The major is the Hormuz and the realization of how trade lines have become so complicated. And we talk about oil, but there's food security and many other issues. And the Gulf states did not want to go into a war because they realized that the implications are endless and Pandora's box can open. And we're seeing it's opening. It's opening in Iran with the start of factioning as we read. It's hard to know what is really going on. You just read what comes out of it. So the factioning in there. But definitely Israel's posturing and feeling of, I think it started with this Hezbollah, with the pagers, and the feeling that, we did something that was out of a James Bond movie that shows the greatness of their services. And then I don't see that they won the war with Hamas, honestly. I don't see, because the price was so high and Hamas is still there and we're still in phase 1 of the Gaza. So definitely our region is all interconnected. In any war that happens somewhere affects somewhere else. And this is very true. I mean, the Gaza war has delayed the normalization process with Saudi Arabia because of the situation. It has impacted a lot the mood in the Arab world and has brought back the Palestinian issue up front. For many years, people had gone on and moved on, and it has changed. So I agree with you. There is an interconnection, but I think that maybe Israel thought that Iran's war would be an easy one. And we're seeing that how complicated it is and how far. So we're just hoping and really hoping that this will end soon. There will be an agreement about Hormuz, of course, but about the nuclear and our ballistic, and about Iranian actions in the region and their proxies, which affect all of us. I mean, we're not to undermine this.
Well, Dina, we could talk to you all day about Middle East politics, but I want to move on to the personal story of Dina and your very impressive diplomatic career. On this podcast, we're always really interested to know how public servants got their start. And I read somewhere that your family wanted you to become a doctor, but that an early encounter with a cadaver in biology class dissuaded you from the medical profession.
I don't know how you got across this one. That was naughty, Amanda, but it's true.
I was curious of that story and how you made the pivot.
Well, my mother would kill me if she hears me say it, because, that's many decades ago when it was like right to be a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. You had to take one of the three. And so she thought this political thing was ridiculous. Like, what is my daughter going to do with all of that? So to please her, I did, but that was such a horrible, I mean, I would have been a doctor that I personally wouldn't go to. First of all, I have no clue about the names and the whole thing of no, I mean, but I fixed it. So I'm fine now.
But so was politics something you were always passionate about and something that you really wanted to pursue instead?
I always was interested in international relations and what's going on and following, and I went to school in the States. So I was in Mills College when it was a girls' college. That's where my late father wanted me to be because he felt, it's very safe and good. And my aunt lived in Oakland. So that was what he wanted. And then I went to Colombia and I was very interested and still am in political affairs. So I enjoyed it. It was a personal thing. And I think when you're a student, if you enjoy what you do good. So I did that. And then I went and worked with the Crown Prince at the time, Prince Hassan, who's the brother of the late King Hussein, for a few years. And then went to Harvard for 1 year for a 1 year program. And then ended up in Paris when I got married. I was in Paris. And then His Majesty, King Abdullah, the actual king, felt that there should be more women in the service. And so that year, I was one of two that were appointed. She was appointed in Brussels and I was appointed in Paris. So that was, the start of my career was political and, we're a monarchy. So when you enter the service, you're at the discretion of His Majesty.
So indeed, you were one of the first in still a fairly small group of women in the diplomatic service. Could you kind of describe a little bit what that experience was? What was it like to be? I mean, of course, now there are many more women in the diplomatic service, but what was it like back then to be amongst the few women? Was it something pros in the sense, and what were the cons of that experience?
Well, first of all, it's very hard because you feel that burden. First of all, you feel guilty, like, oh, they chose me. Am I worth it? You question yourself as a female, at least we used to. And I felt the burden of doing well because I felt if I don't do well, they're going to say it's a woman. And you always have that in the back of your mind. You don't want to do something bad because there's accusation and they dissect you at the beginning. So I remember when my name came out, of course, a small society we are at the time, at least. Is she good enough? Is she qualified? Does she have a degree? I was graduated from Columbia, from Mills. I went to Harvard. That was there was always the questioning, is she qualified? And this is always the thing that comes up to mind. And that's very frustrating. I remember when I was in the Security Council, that year, they wanted to have a woman, Secretary General of the UN. And there was lots of women. And I remember we did these panels because when I was on the Security Council, there were a lot of women on the Security Council. So there were these debates about women, and a lot of men would raise their hands and said, okay, yeah, we accept a woman, but she has to be qualified. And then I said, why is this always added at the end of the sentence? Like, is it possible that a woman who's bored having her hair done and her manicures and doesn't know what to do with life and say, oh, maybe I'll become Secretary General. Like, there is so many times things that are said without thinking, and you need to stop it. You need to stay, hey, pause and think of what you're saying, because we're always looked at, dissected more than others. But now, luckily, 40 years later, things have improved a bit.
A bit. For women that may be listening, are there strategies that you developed to navigate what was traditionally a very male space in terms of responding to those types of comments, having the added pressure to prove yourself? What advice would you give to women?
First of all, work as hard as you can, because this is what will cover you up is your work and your production. If you're mediocre, it doesn't work, but work very hard. Believe and trust that you can go very far, because if you don't believe in your own capacity, nobody else will give it to you. Except in my case, it was easy. I have a king who supports me. But I'm saying in a job, it's not always the case, And I think third of all, you should not be sensitive. A lot of things you just throw, because if you're sensitive and you allow things to bother you, they've won. And so right now, I don't take things personal. But that's after many years. But what I try to tell people, never take things personal. A lot of times you receive bad vibes or bad comments because of where you are, not because of who you are.
That's very wise. You mentioned there the fact, obviously, Jordan is a monarchy. Could you just describe a little bit how you consider the differences or not. But I mean, what does it mean to be a diplomat in a monarchy as opposed to, say, being an ambassador in whatever, the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Well, I mean, obviously, we belong to the diplomatic corps and we are part of that. And we have the Minister of Foreign Affairs who dictates and supports our policies and gives us direction on how we go, where we go. And of course, we work with other ministries as well, because you have the economic file, you have other files that are technical. But being for the ambassador of His Majesty is normal in our system because His Majesty overlooks the foreign policy de facto. So our minister works with His Majesty on daily basis. And so definitely you're in that capacity. He's very much in tune with the policies. And when he comes to the US, we organize his visits with the foreign minister, but also with his team on what his priorities are. So that's a different way of doing things. But we're all in the same page and we're all in tune in the same way and have our eyes on the same direction. So there's not really, it's a method of work, doesn't change how we all see things the same way.
You had referred to this earlier when you were at the Security Council, that there was a lot of discussion about appointing a woman secretary general. We've had some guests on who have been involved in that campaign. We've had women that have been in the running for some of these other positions. As I'd mentioned in the introduction, I understand you were the first woman from an Arab country to chair a session of the UN Security Council. I'm curious how you saw that dynamic playing out more broadly, what you actually think it will take to get us over the hump, to have a woman eventually at the UN as Secretary General, and how that dynamic has continued to evolve that you've seen throughout your career in terms of women increasingly playing more prominent roles, so that we're not talking about the firsts or the irregularity of a woman actually in that position.
Yeah. You know what? I hate to say it, but there's a difference sometimes in the approach between men and women in political fields. And it's something that I noticed throughout the years. Women like to see an end to something and then fold it and put it and then go to something. I mean, there's a feeling of getting something tangible. I don't know what it is about the way we feel, we think. It's like a project. And politics is everything but that. There's, especially in the UN, there's a lot of emphasis on process. Sometimes I used to feel that we get lost in the process and we lose our sight of where we're going. And then the whole game is the process more than the end. And that's usually the bad side, which I'm impatient with. And I'm in political processes. Is like, come on, guys, what's the end? We need this. What do we want? And the UN is everything but that. A lot of times things go on and on and on. I remember sitting ages in rooms which I never understood, where people read their statements. Everybody knows what everybody else is going to say, but everybody else sits and listens and there's no discussion. So I hope that we would be able to go back to more freedom of navigation in these institutions, because that's the whole idea. But having said that, I think that up till now, I have a feeling they're not ready yet for a female at the UN, and that's very unfair and so I don't know if this year's we have some names, so maybe that would be the start, but there's no reason to think why. I mean, I don't know. It's the countries that vote, and the last vote came at the time when I was there, came from, somewhere close to where we are, that it should be a man. So I hope that will change, but I don't have an answer for why it's that way. Maybe right now in politics and positions of politics, there has to be a lot of charisma for whoever to install himself. And we notice that.
You were giving some pretty good advice there when referring to the fact that you really need to learn to let things brush over. And of course, that is something that I guess you acquire with experience. And thinking about some of our younger listeners, that is, I think, an extremely important piece of advice. I'm just wondering whether you have, because something else that, again, our investigators found out about you and that really intrigued me and I wanted to ask you about is, and I guess this second thing that I'll say may come more easily to younger people who have less experience, at some point you said something along the lines of ignorance can actually be a good thing because it allows you to sort of dive into something. Could you explain a little bit? Because that's, in a sense, that is something which you don't have when you don't have it, when you don't have experience. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, ignorance is bliss. Yeah. I'll tell you why, because I was drawn into the Security Council seat. Jordan has a non-permanent. So we're countries that non-permanent countries prepare their ambassadors years about the system, what to do, what that. And now I was in Paris and I was brought in because the ambassador who was before me was assigned as Commissioner for Human Rights, a fantastic ambassador who knows the UN by heart. And who's very astute, intelligent, and well educated, and the whole thing. He's a member of the royal family, actually. So he went to his post, and midway, like 6-7 months in the job, somebody had to go in. And if I had to do it now, I'd say no, because I didn't know the UN system and I didn't know. But there's some crazy part of me that said, let's go. It's challenging, When you get challenged, you wake up it's easy to stay in the same thing. I arrived there not knowing the system other than what you read. But what you read is never what you experience. And so I was doing things sometimes that were not in the norms of the UN. And I remember once the British ambassador told me, when we were chairing that month, the Security Council, he said, Dina, you're not supposed to talk to the press and give, a brief about the sessions before everybody agreed on what you're going to say. But in any case, go ahead and continue doing it.
Nice.
He was happy with the results. So he said, you're not supposed to do it, but go ahead and keep doing it. And I laughed a lot, It's true. I was not supposed to say it. And then we had to find our place because you have the two, you have the US and Russia, but then you have the 5 permanent, which is a very private club. And then you have us who come in for 2 years and leave. It's like the short tenants. So you know what you're doing in the files that concern. And of course, being the Arab representative, you can imagine the number of files we had. So we worked very hard on that. But then we had to find a lot of presence. So we thought what we should do. And that's when we worked a lot on youth. Because at the time, if you remember, ISIS and all that movement, the extremist movement. And so we were working on the idea of youth in politics and the role. And the Crown Prince came to speak, Crown Prince Hussein. He came to speak at the UN. And that was something that was perfect. And up till now, it's very active. And then I wanted to work on something else. And at the time, ISIS was stealing a lot of the artifacts in the Middle East and sending them off. Actually, they were saying they were destroying them because they were against God and all of that. But in reality, they were stealing them and putting them on the black market and selling them. And there are lots of people who wanted to buy these things, statues and items and things. And so I was crazy enough. That's one of the things that was also crazy enough to get everybody on board and to work on that. And you know what? It's one of the major things that we do now. We're recuperating items to countries that were stolen. We made sure that companies that deal with artifacts do not buy them. We made sure that individuals who are collectors, who are on the black market, don't buy them. So what I'm saying, sometimes not knowing, being ignorant about the complications, about the difficulties, gets you further because you're not inhibiting yourself. And so this is the advice that I tell the young. Don't inhibit yourself. Don't say, I can't do this. Just try. And sometimes you'll be surprised and you will find yourself, you win.
No, I love that.
But you know what? I have to say, whoever did your research is naughty. You're finding all the things that I'm trying to forget.
I will give a little shout out to Megan Palser, who's one of our excellent students at IE, and really enjoyed learning about our guests. So I love the advice of ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
And I also heard that is sometimes you need to be a little bit crazy. So I'm curious, you talk in a very light way, but have worked on very, very heavy subjects. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I know you've done a lot of work on refugees. You were just talking about ISIS there. How do you stay healthy and sane and balanced with all of these very demanding, high-pressure jobs and really difficult political subjects?
It's not easy because, for example, during the Gaza war, I was affected personally, because nothing is worse than seeing the destruction, the human suffering, the children who cannot eat. No, it's not possible. You feel like you want to go there, and so there are moments in the job when we saw ISIS at the time. I remember when first meeting Nadia Murad, that wonderful lady who managed to come out of being abused by ISIS and used as a sex slave. There are moments there when you realize the harshness, and that's a reminder every day. But what you need to do, you have the choice of sitting on a couch and sombering in depression. And I say it's easy to sit there and either be very sad, very angry. In my position, I have the luck of being in a place where I do meet the people who matter. And so for me, my way of helping myself out is by using these connections, this job, in getting the voices out and getting the message and sort of talking to the right people. That helps. That helps. It doesn't help solve my anxiety when I see this thing. So that helps. And second of all, during Gaza, I spend a lot of time with a lot of my colleagues, and we share experiences and feelings with the ambassadors as well. That helps in your personal life, at the end of the day, because you can discuss, you can talk, they feel with you about these things. But using your contacts and your position is super important, super important. And whatever people say about what you do, you don't do enough, you do wrong, it's okay. But that's the privilege of people who sit and watch and complain and judge. In my position, I have no time for that. I just say, what can we do to help? And that's something that's very important. That goes back to what advice I give the young. Just concentrate on your work and go forward.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, Dina, what would you describe as your biggest success and why?
I think some of my personal successes, I would say, is the effort and energy I put in helping my colleagues, diplomats, in loving what they do and bringing the best out of them. Funny enough, as much as I have done in my political career and tried to do my job right, I think I was okay. But the part that I'm happy about most and satisfied about most is how most of my colleagues, I hope to say most, when they leave the job, they take something out of it, and they take it for a long time, and they remember it well.
Well, Dina, let me move on to the final question. You frankly brought so much laughter and joy already to this conversation, but I wanted to ask if you could tell us something that has brought you joy in the last few days.
Well, we're looking forward for the FIFA.
Yeah, yes.
Our team has qualified and they're coming to the US. So we're having 3 games so far, maybe more, who knows? But we're starting off in Santa Clara with the 2 games with Austria and Algeria, and then in Dallas with Argentina. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So these are the things that are joyful, because it's nothing beats soccer in getting people, and you know that, in getting people's feelings and emotions and sort of a happy nationalistic vibe that comes with it. So we're looking forward to that and doing functions around it. So that's the joyful stuff that my work sometimes brings to me.
Well, yes, the fun part of diplomacy is getting to do those types of events. Well, Dina, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of your experiences with us.
So, Dina, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. We learned so much, and I'm sure all our listeners have. And above all, we learned how important it is both to learn how to brush off negativity and to, at times, unlearn what you know and sort of jump in the deep end and try out crazy things. But whatever you do, always be serious about your work and get on with the job. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Amanda, to you and to Nathalie. It's been a joy to be with you. And I wish all the young people going in this field all the best, and let them enjoy it. It's a wonderful field, really.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you again. Power and Purpose is an IE Insights podcast produced in association with IE University and Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Production and sound design by Reptile Studios. We'll be back soon with the next episode. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to Power and Purpose wherever you get your podcasts.